Hi, thank you so much for having me. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Brilliant. Nora, we are very thankful to you and to Unconventional Ventures that you guys could join us today and talk about a topic which I feel very deeply about. Don't get chance to converse about it or talk about it on my social media in some way because, yeah, I don't know. But we'll be going deeper into it in a while. But tell us about a little bit about yourself. Let's start there. So that audience can get a sense of who you are as a person.
Sure. And where do we start? So I think I'll start from the very beginning because that gives a little bit more insights to the many perspectives that I do come with in my industry. So I am not born, but raised here in Sweden. I came here as a refugee from Iran at the age of 5. So that's how early it started. I've been fortunate enough to end up in the startup ecosystem for how many years is it now? 16 years ago. And that was actually by chance and not by choice. And it's kind of what's been following me ever since. I ended up working in the IT and telecom industry, which is obviously the very sexy tech industry. Well, I don't know about sexy anymore, but we'll get to that point. And I had a great fortune to work with Nordic companies entering international markets and working with international companies entering the Nordics. I was responsible for many of the business and marketing and brand strategies of very known companies. And I ended up working a lot in the US and some European markets. And interesting enough, in 2016, I got acquainted with impact tech and I completely fell in love because then you had both of the biggest things in my life, which is obviously impact, looking at both from a societal and an environmental perspective, but also utilizing technology to solve many of the challenges that we're facing today. So I started to work with Nordic companies. And interesting enough, I realized even more so than what was the start of me ending up here, which is literally, we have great quality of life, but we do not have equality. And that really impacts the products and services that are being produced. And if we look at it from a global perspective, we're actually falling behind. And, you know, we've heard all of the great myths about the Nordics, where we are, how we positioned ourselves. And I still believe in what I call the Nordic dream. I still believe that this ecosystem can accelerate all of the above that I just mentioned, but we have to be very honest of where we are. So with that being said, I ended up becoming an edtech founder, raising capital as a sole female founder, immigrant background, not STEM educated, pregnant with my third. So you can imagine how many questions I got from investors that have very little to do with my business or business model and very much to do with me. So I realized in order to find those proper investors that realized or potentially understood the storytelling that I was coming with, meaning coming from, you know, all of these backgrounds, but still doing so much and having incredible traction, I actually went to the US, found my investors there, came to the Nordics, and there I kind of realized that, wait a minute, if this is the way for me, and I'm privileged because I've been moving around in this ecosystem, I know a lot of people, I don't have the network problem, but still it affects me. How does it affect others? So in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, I seeing how the pandemic shifted and changed a lot of things, but also I think made many of the challenges very much more visible, that even though we were all in it together, we were not in it together because of a lot of different backgrounds that we in the society come with and opportunities or lack of opportunities. I realized the best way to create the change and seeing many of the innovations that I want to see being tackled and challenges with that as well, is that actually I needed to become closer to the capital. So I became general partner of Unconventional Ventures together with an amazing co-founder, Thea Messel, based in Copenhagen. Today, we are a Nordic venture firm, early stage investor focusing on impact tech, built by diverse founders. Some call it underrepresented founders. Me, I call it historically excluded founders, because I truly believe that diversity is key. I truly believe in order for us to build all of these amazing products and solutions we desperately need, that is not a nice to have, but a need to have, we need the Jedi lens. And the Jedi lens is justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. Now, I've been talking for a very long time. Sorry about that. It was a long story to the many perspectives I think I need to share, just to give you some insights on what I bring to the ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Nora. I have a lot of points to cover, but I'll go into the country where we started, where there's a revolution happening right now, Iran, for example. And these things cannot be sidestepped, because where you are building something, it has a lot of impact on what you build and where you go eventually. So I think these problems eventually will lead to a certain set of solutions, and I hope we find a solution to whatever is happening back home or back there. I just
Thank you so much for acknowledging that and for raising that. And obviously, while we're speaking, my thoughts and prayers are with the people of Iran, because right now they are going through things, fighting for basic human, having the freedom. What is freedom? That's a whole nother subject. But I think that also gives me an incredible perspective on what are truly the innovation we need in this society, that also impacts us in a way that I think many investors might miss, because they don't have the perspectives of what it is to fight for basic needs in the society, or even basic access to the freedom to choose.
Yeah, completely relate to that. And I think that's probably the lens from which the VC industry and the startup industry, because when you are in a position of power, your perspective is very different. You don't see those things, you don't feel those things, so you don't relate to those. And eventually, if you don't relate, you cannot take them forward, because they are excluded from your vision. It's the same in politics, it's the same in society, it's the same in startup world, I think. That's how.
You're exactly on point. And I always try to have that in any conversation that I have, but also, when I see problems, right? I think the startup community is problem solvers, right? Either you're an innovator or you're a supporter, right? I myself am less of an innovator, but I'm more of a supporter. And I think having the perspectives is what allows you also understand that so many of the policies and the many of the structural barriers that we see are built by people that has zero experience from the barriers, right? So when we understand that, we need to then decide, where do we want to be, right? And I think that kind of happened for me, that I saw this ecosystem, I realized what was needed, and I realized that we need to have a top-down approach and not a bottom-up. And the bottom-up is kind of keeping the status quo, to be honest. But then also, I think as a mother, and I think we talk too little about that, as a mother, I don't have the privilege of being patient. As a mother, I don't have the privilege of waiting for someone who's going to solve this, right? And I think I realized that if in this society, me experiencing all of the things that I've experienced, I could see that my kids would experience the same things, and that scared the hell out of me, right? You mentioned politics. I think people are privileged when it comes to politics if you have the right to choose what to vote on, when most of us that aren't privileged need to fight for basic human rights, right? And I think when we're tackling some of the biggest challenges in our society, we talk about environmental climate goals. Well, some of the layers are actually equality. We need to put equality back on top of the funnel, and then from there work our way down. And if we tackle equality, then we'll see different kind of gender equality and so on and so forth. We see that climate is not just CO2 emissions, right? It's about education, the access to education. It's about health, the access to health care. It's about wealth, right? It's all of those things. To be privileged to just think about the CO2. That's kind of how I narrow it down at the end of the day.
Awesome points, Nora. And I think I find a connection here because when I'm sitting down thinking about some of the things, and I think I'm also coming back to these never-ending loops, like where does it go? And you're absolutely right. This has been my thesis for some years. We have been talking a lot about climate, but I think climate issue eventually is not a climate issue, it's a governance issue. And where is the governance? Governance is not equal. So most of the structures that we see right now, the biggest machinery or the biggest infrastructure that humanity has ever created is the war machine. So war, weapons, that's the industry which has come out because men are in power, because I think we have been traditionally been privileged to be in the power. And we see that in large industry creations like wars, and so not humanitarian or peace-based effort, but there's so much more war effort. But that goes to simple things like automobile designs, again, designed by one particular gender. So eventually, a simple thing like equality on the top could solve so many challenges, and that's a social issue.
Absolutely right. I have nothing. I agree with you. And I mean, if you look at what's happening now with the market conditions, that's one topic of itself. But I mean, if you look at impact investing, right, that's kind of where I am. It's literally social entrepreneurship proven that it's profitable, right? If we're really scaling it down and removing a lot of that fancy words, and it's social entrepreneurship, right? That is proven to be very, very high growth. And I think as an impact investor, it's my obligation to also acknowledge that and look at it differently. And that's kind of the conversations we need to have, right? What is the whole world of nonprofit perpetuating? What is the world of NGOs perpetuating, right? Because these are also the reasons why we're seeing diverse founders or underrepresented founders or founders, founders of color or women. We see them as, initiatives. I don't know how many years. I mean, I worked with, promoting diversity, equity, inclusion before I learned about the Jedi lens, and that's kind of what I'm sticking with. But I don't know, I think it was literally, I mean, we raised a fund and I still hear from some LPs that, oh, Unconventional Ventures, what a great initiative. Like, oh, okay. So it's really about these boxes that we have that we need to understand in order to understand what are some structural barriers and what are they rooted in. And I think going back to, I don't have the privilege to be patient and waiting for change, but also as soon as I step in these spaces, and obviously just my visuals is quite different from the industry that I represent. So I'm by default already either politically or, non-conforming or being the elephant in the room. So when everyone else in that space is cheering each other on and high-fiving each other for record-breaking years and incredible exits, I can't high-five you. There's a lot of other things I would like to do, but I can't high-five you because we need to acknowledge what part of this ecosystem are we celebrating. And if we're always focusing on the data, which is very skewed, right? The data telling us these are great investments based on these narratives of who are the founders, what do they bring to the table, then we see that it's an ecosystem filled with structural barriers coming from social background at early ages, access to networks, access to schools, universities, access to management or leadership roles, access to, all of these things combined. And then you decide to build a startup with high growth potential. And then you walk into a room to an investor and say, hi, this is me. I am nothing of the above, but I can build an incredible company. I think we need to start from the bottom, work our way up, and then decide at the top of the funnel, what lens are we using?
I think that's an amazing point, Nora, the lens that we are using. And you mentioned the word privilege a few times during your conversations. I've been picking it up because when you put a post on LinkedIn, I put a comment a little while ago that somewhere I remember from my high school books, because when I was reading general relativity, so maybe it was Einstein who said that there are no privileged frames of references, but the real life is all filled with privileges.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right that the ecosystem itself has a privileged place, and which means maybe you might have a great solution for humanity, but you can't show its business value yet because you are a social entrepreneur, as opposed to you have a very slick marketing tech solution here. And everybody is saying, okay, wow, it would kind of give a new spin to the Facebook algorithms. Let's invest there. So I think I work a lot with social entrepreneurs, and I've seen so much burnout because we don't have ecosystem which can take them to the next stage. Yeah, that's my reading. I don't know. So I feel a lot of pain on the social entrepreneurship side, which is unresolved.
I mean, there's a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain, and I think it has been one of the hardest things to tackle, learning about others' experience as well, knowing about my own, and then continue every day, right? I say this, it is not because I have grit that others don't have. There's nothing unique about me. The only thing that I have maybe more of is because I'm a mother of 3. So that's the grit, and that's where I get, continue, where I don't have the option of giving up, right? But there's nothing unique about my grit. And I try to tell everyone that, in terms of mental health, when we talk about, we've seen the rise of mental health or mental wellness. And if we look at when this is now a great case for high growth potential, we also need to be honest in that system, what are we looking at? And then if we look at how we are tackling mental health, I talk about microaggression. I'm looking for companies that are really looking into tackling mental health, mental wellness, that accepts the structural barriers that lies today for particularly people of color, as an example, or women even. And I see it from a different perspective. So I think when we talk about privilege, we also have to acknowledge there's a difference between privilege and entitlement. And you can still be privileged and be an ally. That's the difference. And I'm looking for the allies. I'm privileged as well. I'm not saying that I'm not in any way. We all have a scale from 0 to 100, right? It's the same as our biases. Unfortunately, in 2022, I don't believe in unconscious biases. I think we should be very conscious about biases. And it's the same when we talk about racism as an example. There's no one that is non-racist. It's about how much, from the 0 to 100, discriminating other groups, 0 to 100. We need to unlearn every day. So when we talk about privilege and entitlement means that you have access and certain power that you hold on to. And there's not a zero-sum game. If you give up some, doesn't mean that someone else gets more than you. You actually double the amount because you will then have the support of the person that you supported. That makes you twice as strong, twice as powerful. Imagine loosening up on your entitlement and your privilege and creating access for others. So if I created access for hundreds of people, that's where my power lies. It's not that the power is solely for me. And then power comes in different shapes, right? It comes in terms of access to money. It comes in terms of access for funding. It comes to access to knowledge. It comes to access of actually solving problems for myself, my community, or the greater part of the communities that exist on a global scale. And that is what I wish to see more of. And that is what we're focusing on in Unconventional Ventures, as we are also obviously really excited about the incredible returns that these founders in products and services will give us, right?
Yeah, great. Nora, let's go into, you have a report that comes out. Like, can we go there and can we pick out, let's say, 2 or 3 main points for our audience? Like, what are the main findings? And you've been on this for some time now. What is your learning, and how does Nordic fit in the larger world perspective based on those findings?
Yeah, so we do a report each year. This is our 4th. We take a temperature of the funding gap. And the reason why we take temperature of the funding gap is it's also to keep ourselves accountable. It's not just about knowing where we are, but it's also, we need a baseline. And in order to have that baseline, I know there's a saying like what gets measured gets done, but I think what's get measured is also what we cannot stray away from, right? We cannot pretend that it's a feeling or it's a soul experience. This is the numbers, right? So I think some of the numbers that this year is actually disheartening, because when you've done this work for the couple of years that I've done and see that there hasn't been any change, quite the opposite, we've been going backwards, it's really disheartening. But it also gives you motivation, because at this point, I'm not here to convince anyone. I have incredible people that I know are also doing the work. There's an incredible VC based in Malmö. I saw their name was here, Pale Blue Dot, which is one of the biggest climate funds or venture funds in Europe, that has incredible numbers when it comes to investing both in climate and diverse founders. So kudos to you. So we're not the only ones. So that's why I'm saying that there's an ecosystem that are really doing the work. But then there's an ecosystem that is perpetuating what we're seeing. So in terms of Nordic, I mentioned that once upon a time, we were known for being the most gender equal in the region. But I truly believe that entrepreneurship and ownership is the strongest pathway to that. And therefore, when we look at that, we could see that women-led companies or women-founded companies only received 0.5% of all funding in Sweden. The Nordics was 0.7. When we look at how profitable women-led companies are compared to male-led companies, it's as much as 45% higher. Now imagine this: female-led companies get as little as 1/3 of the check size at early stages. Later stages, meaning they've proven the market, they've proven their business model, they've proven their product or service, and now growing and scaling and in several markets. So we look at Series A and beyond. They get as little as 1/6 of the check size. In spite of all of this, they perform even better. So that kind of tells us that they're very creative with what they have, and these businesses are here because there's a need to have and not a nice to have, right? That's one part of the findings that we get. And then the other part of the finding is obviously in collaboration with Atomico, which they have a broader data set. Because of the slim and narrow funding in the Nordics towards female founders, it was really hard for us to have the same data set when it came to diverse founders from an ethnic perspective. So we did a collaboration, and there we could see yet again, and these from a gender lens are obviously more than just women and men, but we could see that when it comes to ethnic minorities in Europe, we've received as little as 1.1% of all funding in Europe. Ethnic diverse founders actually get less than women because women receive 1.3%, looking from one gender aspect. But if we look at the global numbers are bad, but it's not as bad as in the Nordics. And then we compare to UK, Germany, and France. Besides comparing with the Nordic countries, we compare to UK, Germany, and France for the reasons that most often Nordic companies enters one or several of these 3 markets after entering any of the Nordic markets. And we could see that Germany was actually performing better when it came to valuation and check size for women-led companies. You had France and UK that performed a little bit better when it came to female-led companies and also mixed-led companies. But the sad truth is, and I know it's hard, and I know we want to blame the pipeline, but we just need to stop and be honest about the pipeline problem, is that white male founders today receives around 99 to 95% of all capital. And yes, I'm mixing in the mixed teams as well, because there are men there as there are women. So obviously in some regions, women are receiving more than 1%, but it's because they're part of a mixed team. And then if we look at this from an ecosystem perspective, I'm a female or a woman GP. It means that I founded and run my venture fund. There are, last year, there were 5% of us. This year, there were 6% of us. So yay, more women-led funds. But to this point, you have to understand that we only have 1% of all asset under management. The 1% haven't changed from last year to this year, although female GPs are more in Europe. So that tells us that in this ecosystem, it's the same, right? It's the 1% to female founders. It's the 1% to women GPs. So it can't be about the pipeline. We need to be honest about who the decision makers are. And obviously, going back to the core, we built an ecosystem, or the founders of this ecosystem are investing in the same pattern matching. And in order for that to change, I think now more so after seeing the report and doing it for 4th year, Atomico is releasing their next report now in beginning of December with a more European lens. And I am sure it's going to say the same, is that we need to start writing checks. We need to stop with the mentorship has an incredible effect, but somewhere down the line, we're mentoring diverse founders, investing in white male founders. That's the truth. That's a fact. So whose responsibility is it?
Very important points, and I don't know where to start, because the ecosystem seems so okay. You're putting it very correctly. I think mentoring is going on well. We see even at Companion, for example, 50 to 51% of our entrepreneurs that come are female background, 35%. These are foreign entrepreneurs. So mentoring seem to be, but I think we are stuck on, from what I gather from your talk, we are stuck on the cutting the checks side, number one. Another thing where we started very early, where you were talking about we need to be honest, like Nordic, what is the Nordic dream and myth about Nordic. I don't know if our narrative is correct, because when you see Nordic from outside, I came to Nordic, like I moved 8 years ago. So it's like about, there are three things you hear about Nordics. It's like innovation. Wow, it's the best in innovation. Okay, one checkbox. The other is that it's about equality. I think that's where we are. Probably we have a positioning, but we are the reality on the ground is different. And happiness. That's again, I think, something which I like to question, like really, because when we take startup media, it's still building those happy cases, the startup battle of building something on those 99% whose startups eventually don't become the Klarnas, what happens to them, or if they're creating that. So I don't know, what do we do? So I have two questions then. Given what you're hearing, how can this be connected on the cutting the check side? And what do we need to do on the narrative side and on the media side? Let's start with the check cutting side. Like, what needs to happen? What structural changes are needed?
We need more diverse fund managers.
Mhm.
Women are not, I mean, if we look at, we need to look at it from an intersectionality perspective, intersectional perspective. We need to talk about intersectionality. I don't think many even talks about that. We were talking about men or women, or sometimes I think minorities, but we need intersectionality. That is key. The same effects that we want to see in terms of founder community, we need to have that with the investment community, right? There are so many barriers to even create or build a fund. Obviously, for many reasons, I understand from a risk mitigation, but we also need to be honest about who are we keeping out, right? In terms of becoming investors. It's an incredible knowledge gap in between when it comes to just building a company. I mean, there's an information overload. We can't Google things anymore. Some we can, but basic things. Have you ever tried Googling how to register my company in Swedish? You get 20 pages with different information, and all of them never tells you then you need to register in 2 different entities. No one tells you tax related questions, legal related questions. All of this is still not accessible, right? And that's the basic minimum to build a company. That's one thing. The other thing is media's role. We need to stop celebrating millionaires or billionaires that are not improving our world from an environmental or social aspect. That's one thing. We need to be honest about the history of innovation, because there are so many amazing innovators that have been literally left out of the story, right? We hear about Jeff Bezos, Elon, and Bill, and so on. But the real innovators that they're building their products on, the layer of incredible thought leaders that are both women, diverse, ethnic, foreign, all of that. And I always use this as an example. So the men I just mentioned, there's a research stating that when you mention these names, almost over 80% of college students knows exactly who all of them are, right? But if I were to mention a couple of the names that they built their innovations on, I would get less than 30%. So if you don't know about people like Catherine, Dorothy, and Mary that built the whole algorithm that made the space travel possible. Look that up. 3 amazing Black women. You had Ada Lovelace in the 1800s, right? She built the first, what is now the first version of the computer. And Grace Hopper that literally created the first version of an algorithm that is today the base of artificial intelligence, AI, machine learning, right? So if we don't know the true history of innovation, we need to get media focus on we always also talk about, media's role in finding new inspiration. But the thing is, we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. The incredible inspirational stories are already there, but they're not getting the attention. So we don't need to find new, and you don't need to look to me and ask, okay, who's the next? We need to talk about who were the previous and then build on that to understand the next.
Got it. I think, and I'll turn to the chat here for a minute. Let's see, because I found something very interesting here. So Julia was writing something here.
Yes.
I have to admit, I had to unfollow a number of accelerator program social media accounts recently because I could not stand anymore the hypocrisy. There's an active social campaign about gender equality and inclusivity, how these accelerators are supporting gender equality, inclusivity. Unfortunately, when it comes to promotion of the selected startups to be accepted in these programs, of those they got invested, 90% are not aligned with the initial message at all. No gender equality. So good. Equality or inclusivity. So there goes the marketing disconnect, and the same thing that we were talking about, the Nordic dream or the Nordic positioning versus the things being how they are, as you are mentioning, that 0.5%. Like, that's not a huge percent. Yeah.
No, and here's the thing. I know so many accelerators and investors and venture firms really wanting to invest in women, ethnic or foreign-born or ethnic diverse founders, LGBTQ+, really looking for more intersectionality. So I'm not saying that they're not there, but their foundation by default is excluding these founders. And that's what I say to them. That's where they need to start. So instead of focusing on, oh, we need to create the pipeline or find the pipeline, you have to start with it, right? And it's the small things as, what are our assumptions based on? What are our analysis based on? Who is doing the assessment? What is the potential risk of biases that occurred in this, right? And there's a great way of really displaying it. The whole femtech space. Not that old. Femtech 2014. Remember what happened? No, don't worry. You don't have to have the answer because barely anyone knows when I talk about this. So 2014, Apple launched their whole health segment. Anyone remembers that? Where you could also, with Apple Watch, you could monitor everything. But what did they forget? Period tracker. They didn't have a single female engineer on the team. So they built all of this tracing and tracking health, heart rate, steps, sleep, everything. But one of the core elements for over 50% of the population of the world, period tracker. So I think that is a great example that displayed, like, there are so many reasons and incredible potential that we really need to have in place ASAP. So the question is, who is behind it and where do we go from here?
You're absolutely right. And okay, let me look at the time. We have around 15 minutes. I would like to explore a little bit more into, let's go into the unconventional ventures territory. Can you tell us or tell the audience a little bit about how do you operate? Like, how do you identify, how does your deal flow look like? Do people reach out to you, or do you reach out and do active sourcing? How does that work? And number two, what's your mission behind this? Yeah.
So let me start about the mission. Our mission is to unleash the potential of diverse founders or underrepresented founders building impactful companies, tackling some of our world's biggest challenges. That's the mission. Our incredible pipeline and deal flow is coming from, we've been working actively in the ecosystem for 4 years. It took us 4 years to get our fund up and running. And I'm very proud to say that we launched our 30 million euro fund, making it Europe's first impact fund that exclusively invests in underrepresented founders. And underrepresented founders, it's founders identifying as women, minorities, immigrants, founders of color, LGBTQ plus. Obviously, there's a lot more layers within that, but it's just to narrow it down to make it, very easy for people to understand like what's the top of the funnel, and we have even more identities underneath. With that being said, it's about having true impact at the core of the business model. So the business model needs to adhere to any of the 17 SDGs. But if you know the truth about the SDGs, you would know that they were 22, narrowed down to 17. Don't get me started who narrowed it down. But we also obviously have a couple of layers to that. We've been fortunate enough to receive a lot of incredible deal flow. So with that being said, we launched the first ever digital accelerator for diverse founders in 2021. I say this, as I said, we're the first impact fund, not with pride. I'm actually sad. It's 2022. It was 2021 that we launched the accelerator. And the only reason we really launched the accelerator was two reasons. First, it was the pipeline. After working in this ecosystem and building a fund, we kept on hearing there isn't any pipeline. Are they scalable enough? Do they even want to build scalable, high growth companies, so on and so forth? So the accelerator was one way for us to really, shut down that conversation, to be very frank. And that's a 8-week program, remote, free of charge, equity free. And it's really about supporting founders at really early stages, but also, it's not clear to everyone what impact is. And I think we need to do a better job of explaining. It is not having 10 SDGs. It's about having one and sticking to that and maybe potentially tapping into a second. It's as easy as that sometimes. But with that being said, and now with the fund, we're finally able to start investing and writing proper checks. So we go in at pre-seed and seed. We focus on the Nordics plus Europe, but we have a majority focus on the Nordics as we are based here and have been working closely with this ecosystem. We've been working quite closely with the UK, French, and German market as well, but obviously now coming down to several more, but we're a remote first or digital first team. So it's me in Stockholm, it's Thea in Copenhagen, it's Vera in Paris, it's Alexis and Arlene in US. And then we have colleagues in Colombia as well. So we're really scattered at the moment. So it's hard for us to keep up with the pipeline in terms of more markets. And it's also, what value do we bring as an investor? So for us, it's really key that we bring not only capital, but also expertise. So when we look at a potential case, it's also about, do we have the expertise, or do they have co-investors that have the expertise? Can we bring along a co-investor that have the expertise, or does our network have the expertise, and are they willing to go in and support the company? We're very much hands-on, we're very much accessible, and that's why I'm very bad at answering emails, so I apologize for that. But being very bad at answering emails is my way of protecting my mental health. I was telling before the event started, it's crazy. LinkedIn and emails. I'm sorry for the delay in response. But with that being said, I think one of the hardest things is being one of the few in this ecosystem. And therefore, I do a lot of active networking with other VCs, because we're all about building an inclusive ecosystem where we're all investing together. It's not about UV. UV will not save anything or change anything. But if we're going to be very true to our mission, we need co-investors and we need the ecosystem and all stakeholders to invest more diverse. And that's what I do a lot of the time as well.
Great. Thank you, Nora. And I remember the email discussion we had when we were tuning in for the event. I think it's a major overload, information overload. It's an always on economy or lifestyle that it has become, unfortunately. So for my So just for the founders, I'm very email unresponsive. For me, what works best is just one channel. For me, LinkedIn works because it's easy to send a video, audio, message, form, whatever, and do a quick conversation and get a response. I don't know, just saying that. But Nora, great work you're doing at both the accelerator and the fund. What would be interesting to know, is there a connection between the two in terms of, like, deal flow is very broad. You said that there's a deal, it's a place for deal flow, but is it that you select only startups which come to the accelerator into your fund, or is it that you're more open? How does that work?
No, so the accelerator is completely open, doesn't have anything to do with a funnel for a fund. Obviously, that would be super exciting. But for the accelerator is really about the ecosystem and supporting founders. So the accelerator has, I think, so it's 25 companies, 25 mentors. The 25 mentors all come from the VC space. So either they're investors themselves, they run their own venture firms, they do a lot of angel investing. So it's a collaborating ecosystem to make sure that it also gives back to investors in terms of insights and them understanding deal flow, what kind of industries and problems the ecosystem that we are looking into are tackling. So it's equally for investors as it is for founders. So that's our way of bridging. And then to be honest, I think we had our last cohort was in 2021. And out of 25 companies, we're right now invested in one of them now, with the fund being able to close.
And the second question is about the fund. You said that you work at pre-seed and seed. How low do you go? Do you have an absolute marker, like how early do you want to go?
I mean, in terms of, we're very flexible. Obviously, we need to understand what the potential is, and that kind of impacts how low we want to go. But I think as a bare minimum, we're looking at 100K ticket, 100,000 euros. Obviously, that's flexible down, but that's kind of what we look at as a minimum. We go at pre-seed up to around 300. And then I would say, obviously, ownership is something that we look at. You have the typical, 5 to 10%. Obviously, we don't want to impact the future raises, so we're very founder friendly in that term.
Okay, great. Then I have a question. Like, you have enormous experience in entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, impact, building a VC fund yourself, running an accelerator. Like, there's so many hats. What would be your general advice when impact startups are seeking funding? How can they increase their chance of winning?
So
in a biased world?
So two things. First of all, we're all going to experience the biases at one point or the other. Secondly, I think this goes both, well, first, for all founders, I would say focus on the customer. Don't focus on investors. Don't focus on investors to get you the customers. Focus on the investors and let that tell the story. Be very customer centric. Know why your customer loves you, why they would continue to pay for you, why they want to onboard other customers, as an example. I think so. That's one thing. Be customer centric. It doesn't matter if you have one customer or 10 customers. Be the experts of why they love you, your product, your brand, all of those things. And then tell the story about, based on that, this is the work they've been doing, and potentially even manage to attract a couple of more, right? So I think be customer centric. I see too many founders starting to fundraise too soon. And I think media has a big role of that. It's because they're telling the story of the very privileged that have access to capital, the network. And so it was easy for them to raise before they had anything else. Don't get me started on the Adam Newmans of this world. But focus on your customer. That's first. Secondly, when it comes to impact, know your impact. And that part you can actually Google, and you can always ask an investor, what is impact for you, just to make it very clear.
Okay.
So I think knowing what impact is one of the things that I see founders doing the biggest mistake, because when you know what your impact is, then you know what your KPIs are, because impact investors both focus on the financial return, but also on the impact KPIs, right? So it could be measuring environmental goals, or measuring social goals, or measuring both. But you knowing your impact, coming into an impact investor, telling that this is what we're focusing on, this is the business model and the numbers, but this is the impact, right? So my recommendation is also start with one SDG, get perspective on that, become an expert on that, and then see how it aligns with other SDGs, but focus on one, because as soon as you start, then it's not clear as an investor that impact is clear for you.
I think that's a very good point. Instead of like spilling the entire impact in different SDG buckets and try to connect that, maybe it gives you more points as a startup. I think it's good to focus, and I think that's a similar advice we offer on other areas of business development in accelerators. Like Founder Institute says, follow the rule of one customer segment, one business model. Can you take one story out? Because if you succeed with the one, you can take it to make it 2, 3, and 4. It's easier to expand laterally if somebody first takes you vertically, if you can prove something. But great point over there, Nora. Any last thoughts before we close off today's session? Audience, we are very thankful that you've been here and hearing all this. Nora, thank you for your insightful, open, and deep conversation, I would say. So all 3 angles. So any last minute thoughts too? Yeah.
I have. Well, obviously, first of all, thank you so much for everyone for taking the time. I look forward to getting the comments, because I haven't been able to read it, but thank you, everyone. One last thing, and this is very, very tangible to everyone. No means not right now. You have to become the believer of what you're building, and you have to fight for it. But there's a difference between fighting for it and defending it. And knowing the difference with investors, that's where you can really narrow down who are your true investors. And when finding investors, I would literally start with due diligencing them, right?
Okay.
Because if you're targeting an investor that has done 100% of its funding towards a particular type of founder, then you need to start asking yourself, is that founder ready to invest broader?
Okay.
If it's a yes, great. If it's a no, then you can literally decide where to spend your time. And then here's the thing. I needed to go to the US to find my investors. So I'm telling you, the believers are out there. Every no will narrow down the potential yes. So don't be afraid of the no's. Don't give up that easily, but also save yourself time, mental health, and also understanding what are the barriers, because when you know the challenges, then that will get you closer. And I'm sorry that this industry isn't performing better. I'm sorry that we're failing you, but I know you're not failing us, and the things that you're building is going to prove them wrong. So thank you for all the work that every founder is doing in the ecosystem, and I look forward more allies in this ecosystem. Thank you,
Nora. What inspiring thoughts. Really love it. Founders, thank you so much for joining us today. Nora, thank you for taking time off from your lunch and joining us. We try to hold these lunch talks because I find it a good connection point with everybody when we are wrapping up the week. But have a great weekend, everyone. Before I depart, I'll post some links over here for the upcoming events so that everyone can join. Brilliant. Thank you, Nora. Have a great evening.
Have a great weekend. Bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.